pickings, and it was time to fall upon Job and take what he had. And he tempted these men or groups of marauders and raiders to go and to take what Job had. Put the servants to the sword, take all of the livestock, take everything, and head out of town. Unfortunately, this was kind of common, especially in that day and time, especially in that area. Marauders and raiders were commonplace, and you would have to have people who would stand watch and with armed guards, basically to protect your goods and belongings. Well, they were able to do that. They came down, they put the servants to the sword, took off with all of the cattle. Now, as this is all happening in a short period of time, isn't it, right? While one was talking, the other one came up, and then while that one was talking, the other one came up, and 4 times these men came up and said, you know, this group of people have come, they've taken the camels, they've taken the sheep, they've taken the oxen, they've taken all this, and, you know, I alone have escaped to tell you. All right? Now, next thing is the worst, of course. This is the crushing blow, and this is what Satan is hoping is going to drive the wedge between Job and his God, isn't it? Okay? Took all of his stuff. You know, listen, every single one of us, whether we have goods or whether we don't have goods, what we have is important to us, and we want to keep it. But which one of us would not give it up for our children? Would you give up everything you had for your kids, possession-wise? Absolutely. There are a few things that we wouldn't give up. The only thing I won't give up for my children is my relationship with my wife and my soul. Only 2 things. Everything else I'd give up. Third thing, my freedom. I'm not going to lie for them and go to jail for them. Okay. I love my children, but I'm not going to go to jail for them. That's not what's going to happen. But very few things we wouldn't give up. So what happens? Job causes through whatever machination he uses, causes the winds to come. They fall, they blow the house collapses upon all of his children, likely his daughters-in-law and his sons-in-law. They were all together in the oldest one's house. They all died. And then the servant comes and says, you know, behold, a great wind came. You know, all of the young people are dead. And you can imagine. So what does Job do? What was Job's response to all of this? Well, somebody read it. Yep. Chapter 1. Find chapter 1 for me, and I want you to read right to the end of that chapter. I want you to read what his response was. Job arose, did what? He
rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down on the ground and worshipped.
And what does he say?
He said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Okay. Now, here's the kicker, and this is what I love about it. This is the moment that the Satan has been waiting on, right? This is it. This is why he did it in the first place. He wanted to prove to God that this servant that he had such great faith in would turn on him on a dime if he simply took away everything that he had. But what was Job's response? It was the exact opposite of what Satan was hoping for. You talk about a crushing blow. I mean, here he is. He was so confident that he had Job figured out, and he had God figured out. He was disparaging. See, in the garden, Satan disparaged God to man, and see, in this one, Satan disparages man to God. But in both cases, we flip the script, and we prove him wrong. Mankind is capable of great things. He's capable of some bad things, but it's capable of great things. Now, in the garden, Satan was correct. Mankind turned on God. But in this case, we see where mankind does not turn on God. All right? He keeps his faith. He keeps his relationship with God intact. Because not only does he not do what Satan wants him to do, he does the opposite. He, in fact, worships God. He falls to the ground and worships God. Listen, I imagine everybody here has been through some turmoil, and everybody here has been through some rough patches. But what was our first response to that? Was it a proclamation of God as God and the worship of God? Or did we kind of withdraw to ourselves and lick our wounds for a little bit and then slowly venture out and I just don't feel up going back up to church right now? What would our response be? Would it be we're the first people at the door on Sunday morning, or are we going to, I'm just not feeling. I just don't think I can go and be with my brothers and sisters right now. Think about, and that's not, I'm not asking for a response. I'm just thinking about what our response would be. Job's first response was to tear his clothes, and fall to the ground and worship God. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, just have that in mind. Now, let's get into what Brother William was asking just a couple of moments. What is Satan's position today? What position does he occupy in the world? Well, we do know that Satan is bound. All right, there's some things that he could not do. If you take the tack that Satan was asking God's permission, that God had in fact erected, Satan wasn't lying, God had in fact erected a wall or a hedge around Job, then Satan had to ask for permission in order to breach that wall, or that wall had to be brought down for Satan to do what it is he wanted to do. All right, so let's think about this. Go to Matthew chapter 12, verse 29. This is one of those verses that honestly, for a lot of folks, if they're reading at surface level, it's very difficult to understand in the context of what's being spoken of. Matthew 12, 29. Because it's one of those statements where you think, okay, who is he talking about here? What is he talking about? What context are we, what contextual clues can we gather? Well, let's read it. It says here, it says, how can one enter the house of the strong man and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his goods. Now, see, we look at it and we're thinking we're on the side of the strong man, all right? It's his place. We're thinking, why would we take the part of the one who's wanting to come in and spoil the goods? We're on the side of the strong man, right? Hey, it's his place, it's his house, it's his goods. He has the right to defend himself. Why is he even saying these words? Why is Jesus even saying these words? If you think about it, though, let's look at it from the viewpoint of the one wanting to go in and spoil the goods of the strong man. All right, and I want you to think about this parable in this way. All right, how can one enter the house the earth, Satan, spoil his goods, save a sinner? I want you to think about that for just a second. Let's look at that in this context, with not changes, but the understanding of this. So let's read it in this way. How can one enter into the earth, the house of the strong man who is Satan, and spoil his goods or save a sinner from hell, except he first bind the strong man, bind Satan, and then he will spoil his goods? Okay, so now think about that. No one could possibly be saved if Satan were not bound in some way, shape, or form. Satan is the god of this earth. He has power. He has authority. And it's been given to him, of course. But if this is the case, if this verse is accurate, and the mindset behind it, the thought behind it is true, then in order for someone to be saved, then Satan's power must be diminished in some way, shape, or form. Right? It only makes sense. So in that aspect, we can look at this. Is Satan bound in some way, shape, or form? Is he hindered by God, who is the only person that can hinder Satan? We cannot hinder Satan. All right? We have no power to do that. We don't have the kind of power that it would take to hinder a being like Satan. But God does. As God gave permission for Satan to touch Job and his possessions, and later if he's going to touch him to his very flesh, he could not do that if God were not willing for it to happen and allow it to happen. And it makes sense when you think about it like that. All right? So let's think about that. Satan is bound it's in the fact of each and every person who is saved by obeying the gospel. We know that he is bound or hindered in some way, shape, or form. His authority and power is subdued in some way. And it's only subdued by who? The only person that can subdue it. The power of Christ. Okay? All right, number two. Hold on a second. That's not the one I want. That's the wrong verse. See, my memory's going to go on me. Satan cannot tempt, even the weakest Christian cannot be tempted more than they are able to bear. Scripture tells us that, right? God will not allow it to happen. We cannot be tempted any more than we are able to bear. So what happens? There is a limiting of Satan's activity. There's a limitation to his authority. There's a limitation to his power. Now, I'm not about to sit up here and say, well, it's in this way, it's in this form, it's in this shape. I don't know. That is something that's between God and Satan, and they have been determined thousands of years ago without my input. All right, and it's not told me exactly how it's done, but we do know that God has authority. Satan has authority, but God's authority, of course, supersedes and far surpasses Satan's. God is the only one that can do that. So God will not allow that child of God to be tempted any more than they are able to bear. That's a limitation that's placed. That's not a limitation based on the Christian. Our limitations are self-imposed, but Satan certainly isn't. Satan's limitations are imposed by God. All right. So a couple other things in the passage that we're reading now. Satan was certainly chained or limited or bound in some way, shape, or form. Because look at this, he had been unable to touch Job. If we look at it from that standpoint, that God had erected that hedge or wall around Job, Satan had not been able to touch Job all of the days of his life. He had been successful, prosperous. God allowed it to happen and had kept Satan from spoiling his goods, so to speak, if we turn that around a little bit. God had not allowed him to do that. All right, so Satan had not been able to do that. He had to ask permission to go and even touch Job's possessions. All right, so he was hindered in that way, shape, or form. All right, in the first test that he gives, you notice that he says you can't touch him, but you can touch all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on him himself. All right, so we know that there was a limitation placed there. And it looks like slowly those limitations may be removed, but at some point we even see in the second test where God imposes a final limitation. All right, and in the second test he was forbidden to take his life. He says, touch him, but spare his life. And that was not a request, that was a command. You cannot take his life. God hindered him from doing that very thing. All right. Let's look at this. Remember, does Satan love us? He hates us, doesn't he? He wants us to go to the same hell that's been reserved for him and his angels. But look at Luke chapter 22, verse 31. Satan hates us. He'd kill us if he could. As a matter of fact, he'll try. But we do know that God limits that. Because look at what happens even in Luke 22, verse 31. What does it read? Jesus is speaking, and he says, Simon, Simon, what?
Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat.
Okay. Some translations said Satan has asked permission. Satan has, not asked permission. Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. So Satan has to go to God and ask permission to touch one of his disciples, one of his followers, one of his children. That's required. He asks him. He says he demanded. Of course, Satan can demand all he wants, and I imagine he probably is like a petulant child if God says no. But he asked permission. He demands permission. Satan has requested you. He wants you. Did God allow that to happen? We don't know. We don't know the context. We don't know what exactly had happened. But we do know that God had allowed Satan to take Peter, to test Peter, to tempt him. Certainly so. And in some cases he passed. In some cases he failed. Right? He denied Jesus Christ. But he also said that he would go with him even to death. So in both ways, Peter both passed and failed on numerous occasions. Right? All right, let's go to Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. And this is one of those, Revelation is one of those passages of Scripture that it has numerous meanings depending on who you speak to. But I believe this is the case. I believe this is the case in regards to this. Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 3. And someone read that for me.
After these things he must be released for
Okay. Now we will need to make sure that, of course, you talk to a lot of folks in the world, and that 1,000 years is a literal 1,000 years, isn't it? There's 1,000 years, and that's this belief, this dispensational premillennialism. There's a post-tribulation, premillennial. There's pre, post, all of these things. But we need to remember here that 1,000 years we're not speaking of a literal 1,000 years. We're looking at a figurative period of time. It's a long period of time. But what is it saying here? That Satan has been bound by a great chain, and that chain keeps him from exercising the kind of authority that he might have exercised not long before that. All right? So we do know that, number one, God has ultimate authority. Satan had to ask permission in order to do what he wanted to do, and sometimes God allows it, sometimes he doesn't allow it. We know he limits it to a certain point because even the weakest child of God cannot be tempted any more than they are able to bear. So God holds him. He limits his power, limits his authority. So if that answers the question, does that answer the question? What is Satan's authority right now? Well, I'm not given to know exactly what he's able to do, but I do know that God limits him in some way, shape, or form, because Satan would kill me, literally and figuratively. He would kill me if he possibly could. God won't let that happen. All right? There are things that he's not able to do anymore. At one particular point in time, he could send his angels, and they would inhabit human bodies, couldn't they? We read about demon possession in the Old Testament and in the New Testament quite often. It happened quite a bit. So what was happening there? Satan had authority that, have you seen a demon possession? I've never seen a demon possession in this modern day and age. Never seen one. Never once. Never once have I seen one. Is Satan being limited? It would appear so. I don't know of a demon possession that's happened in the past 2,000 years. Could it be that now Satan has been limited in his authority, and he is not able to do the things that he once was able to do with almost impunity? He was allowed to do those things, to test the people, to try them, to beat them down, to subjugate them, all of those things. Could it be that Jesus' work on the cross put an end to some of those things? And after a while, it began to get less and less and less. Again, I'm not speaking as a hard and fast authority. I'm asking simply, could that possibly be the case? It sounds like it. Yeah.
I wonder though sometimes with some of these mental illness or
Mm-hmm.
psychopaths, if they are under the guidance of Satan.
I would imagine they're under the guidance now, whether they have a physical like they're being physically possessed, as we saw in the Old Testament, or I keep saying Old Testament, under the New Testament, where you would see someone who had a demon, who had to have the demon cast out. The idea that I just don't see that in God's character to allow something like that to occur when there's no one that could possibly could take care of that, to get rid of that demon. Again, the idea of not being able to be tested or tempted any more than you're able to bear, that takes any bodily autonomy away from us and says, well, Satan has power over our bodies, and that would be more than we would be able to bear up under, if you think about it, if you look at it that way. I also don't believe that when we read about demon possession, even in the New Testament, I don't believe that demon possession was another word for mental illness. I believe that in the New Testament, if it said they were possessed by a demon, they were possessed by a demon. There was a literal demon that was inhabiting that body, because they spoke to Jesus, and Jesus was able to cast them out. That doesn't sound like a mental illness. So I believe that when it says demon possession, it means literal demon possession. Today, I have my doubts about it, whether it would be a demon possession, simply because of that promise that we're given that anything that happens to us, we're going to be able to bear up under. Now, you get into mental illness, that's a whole different thing, and I can't really speak to it with authority. I really can't. But we do read here, anyway, that Satan's power and authority is limited. It's subject to God's power and authority. And God had to allow Satan to do what it is he wanted to do to Job, to take away his goods, to take away his family, and then to even take away his own health. Satan had to ask permission, and it had to be granted to him by God. So,
It would seem in those instances of demon possession that
Don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, yeah. It was self-evident to everyone there that it had happened.
It wasn't the person that was expelled from
Yeah.
himself.
Right.
As you would have it in a mental case.
Yep. Okay. All right. So that gets in the idea of limitation and the limitation of Satan. Again, what would happen if Satan was given full reign, free reign? He would decimate. He would destroy physically. If he could, he would kill us. He was able to take Job's health, and God even had to give him the commandment: you are not allowed to take his life. You have to spare him. Okay, you can't kill him. You have to spare his life. But his health is in your hands. So Satan was able to do some horrible things to Job, and we'll read about that here in a moment. So that tells us, Satan has a malignant character. All right, he is bad. Wholly bad as God is wholly good. There's no redeeming feature to Satan. There's nothing good about him. He cannot be saved in the sense that, if we just expose him to the love of Christ and we preach the good news to him, then maybe he'll repent of his ways. No, this is a character that we find a being that is wholly and totally evil, continually, forevermore. There is no redemption for Satan. It's not going to happen. There is a hell that's been prepared for him and his angels. That is where they are going to spend eternity, and there's nothing that can be done for it. So when you have someone that is that hopelessly lost, you can imagine the anger and the viciousness that he would attack if he were given reign to do so. It's like saying, the guy that's in jail or the guy that's in prison for the rest of his life with no chance of parole, that's the guy that you don't want walking the streets. You don't want him to have a chance to get out. He's not going to get out and then live a really great life and then say, well, yeah, but I got out and I've been great for 20 years. Maybe I can be. No, this is the guy that you want locked up for the rest of his life. That's the way Satan is. He would kill us all if he were given permission to do so. All right. So think about it. When he deceived Eve, he wanted to completely and utterly destroy her. He wanted to drive her away from God, pull Adam away from God, and succeeded at least to a certain point. Was able to drive them away. You think about when the demons left that herd of swine, or left the man and went into the herd of swine. What did they immediately do? They went to kill the very creatures that they were inhabiting. All right? That's their idea: is destruction, 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 destruction. When Satan entered Judas Iscariot, it wasn't not too many hours before Judas killed himself, hung himself. That's the idea and the mindset of Satan. So when we think about what happens to Job, we understand that it's being done with the full authority given to him by God in order to affect Job's destruction. That's his goal. I want to see how badly I can make Job fall away from God. I want to make him curse God. The idea of wanting to make somebody do that is just unthinkable for us, but for Satan, that's part of his character. It's who he is, right? All right. So now let's look at this. Let's look a little bit further. He rose, rent his robe, shaved his head, fell down upon the ground, and worshiped God. He said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, naked I shall return. He's not going back to his mother's womb. This is the idea, the old Hebrew concept of a human has two mothers, the earthly mother and then the mother earth. And that's essentially what he's saying. I came out of my mother naked, and I'm going to go back into the ground naked. I'm going to be buried. All right. Jehovah gave and Jehovah has taken away. Blessed be the name of Jehovah. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. All right. So that's impressive. You can't look at it as any other way other than this is an impressive mindset from a man who had devoted his life to God. You can't look at it any other way. You don't see where he's saying this out of a desire to get back in God's good graces, and maybe if I do something more, then all of this will be taken away. He just merely worshiped God because that's what he did. That was Job's character. That was Job's nature. Satan's character is one of evil. Job's character is one of righteousness, uprightness, standing before God, blameless in his generations. Okay? So, like I said, that last part is the important part. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That was the direct slap in Satan's face that I think we all need to be looking to do. You know, we can't stand against Satan on our own, but we can give him a slap in the face when he does stuff to us or causes people to do stuff to us. And our response is, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. It is a spit in the face of Satan, and you can't think of a better being to spit in the face of. Now, I would not do that. I'm kind of like the little dog has got the big dog as backup. I wouldn't do that on my own. But since I've got the big dog backing me up, I'll spit in Satan's face all I can get away with. That's what I'm going to do. I hate him as he hates me. All right? Okay, so let's look at it again. Let's go to Job chapter 2. Let's go to Job chapter 2. All right? Somebody read for me verses 1 through 6. I know it's a long passage, but somebody read for me Job 2, verses 1 through 6. Go ahead.
Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? And there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil. And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incite me against him to destroy him without cause." So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin, yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life."
Okay. This kind of sounds a lot like the first chapter, right? All right, so basically, we're not going to don't add too much to this. Now, if you look at the first, it says, it came to pass on the day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Jehovah. All right, so now we look at this. This is yet another day when the people, when men who were serving as priests for their household, I've been looking to see if there's something in antiquity that would tell us that there was maybe a special feast day, maybe there was something special, but this could not be too long after the first occurrence. All right, because we see, well, anyway, it can't be too long after the first occurrence. It's sometime fairly close after that. Now, I don't know when, but it says on the day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. It could be the next week. All right, it could be 2 weeks from then or whatever. But there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. This is on that day, so it's probably a day of worship. The idea of the Sabbath had not yet been enshrined in law, but God had always commanded His people when to worship and in what fashion. So the people that were presenting themselves certainly knew when that day was, even if we don't necessarily know when that day was. It depends on how you date the book. Doesn't really matter. They were all together in the same fashion they were before. They were all there to worship God, and then Satan comes in again in disguise, because he disguises himself as a son of light, doesn't he? All right, so he comes in as a worshiper. God is not fooled, even though maybe the men of God are fooled. He is not fooled. He sees Satan for who he is, and he confronts him again. I love this. You can imagine this is just there's a little bit of pride, and I don't mean that in a bad way, pride in God's voice when he says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And Satan's like, "Yeah, I've considered your servant Job." He's furious because Job didn't do what he thought he was going to do, and he can't understand it. Surely, if you take away a man's goods, surely if you take away this greatest of the men of the East, is what the Scriptures tell us. Surely, if you take away all of his stuff, he'll renounce you. The only reason he's with you in the first place is you've blessed him, and then you've kept anything from being taken away. Satan thought he had God and Job figured out, and he blew it big time. So Satan is already angry. He's already steaming. He's fuming over this Job that won't do what he thinks he ought to do. So he's angry. He says, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him in the earth." You better believe that. Man, how many people would turn their backs on God even today? They would turn their backs on God if their goods were taken away. Happens all the time. He is one that feareth God, and he turns away from evil, and he still holds fast to his integrity. And like that word, a lot of times we talk about the patience of Job. I think the word integrity is probably this is a book of integrity rather than patience. See, there's a patience factor to it because Job believed in the resurrection and he believed in the Messiah, and we'll see that here in just a little bit later on in the study. He believes in that. But I think of the idea that Job did not know that he would receive his goods back. He had no idea. As far as he knew, God gave them to him, he's taken them away, and he'll die, poor and childless. That's just he doesn't know. But he's going to remain, he's going to have integrity towards God whether he receives all of his stuff back or not. So I think that might even be a better idea of the book rather than patience of Job. It's the integrity of Job. All right? So he says, he still holds fast to his integrity even though, and I like this, God even acknowledges. He says, you moved me against him to destroy him without cause. There was no reason to do what we did, but I'm going to allow you to do it. And it's not to solve some sort of cosmic bet like some people believe. This is not a bet between God and Satan. This is a point God was going to prove. God knew. God knew what Job was going to do. He knew his heart. So God was allowing a lesson to be learned. Satan was going to learn a lesson. We're going to learn a lesson. I like that because God allowed that to happen. Guess who's still learning from that 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years later? We're still getting the benefit from it. And if Job had never received his stuff back, if Job had died poor and sick and childless in the desert, we would still get the benefit of what happened to him. We would still get the lessons from what happened to him, but that's not what happened. So give me just a second. Let me pull this back up. All right. So he says, Satan answers God and says, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. But put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will renounce you to your face. All right? So Satan has not learned his lesson. He still believes that Job's obedience to God is bound up in what he has. Yes, he's lost all of his stuff, but he's still healthy. He's still got his health. A lot of people believe that. Hey, I still have my health. I'm not dead. I'm not even sick. I don't have anything, but I'm okay. I'm doing all right. I like that word, skin for skin. I've heard a lot of people try to explain that, but essentially this. Satan believes that if God allows Job to be tortured by Satan, that Job will give him up. But we know that's not the case. All right? He believed he would renounce God, but he doesn't. All right, so he says, put forth your hand. I like how Satan tempts God to harm Job on his own. He says, put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will renounce you to your face. So here's Satan, not enough to take away his stuff. He's tempting God to act against Job again without cause. Like again, what is Satan's character? What is Satan's character? Can we ever depend or rely on him or trust him in any way, shape, or form? Not even a little. If he speaks, assume he's lying. That's just a good course of action. Assume he has your worst interest in mind, no matter what. If Satan says, I'm going to give you $1 million, you better believe the strings that come with that $1 million are going to cost you everything, because that's who he is. Okay? All right. So he says, now you stretch out. I'm sorry, you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking of a couple of scriptures where it says he's like a roaring lion, whom he desires devour.
Yep.
And the other one says that resist Satan and he'll leave you alone.
You think about that. You think about a lion. I think a lot of times we think about that. Remember that a lion has no scruples, right? A lion will eat a baby antelope as well as it'll eat an adult antelope. It'll eat a sick antelope as well as it'll eat a healthy antelope. It doesn't care. It doesn't have any morality as far as that's concerned. A lion's a lion. It's in his nature, right? It's in a lion's nature as a top predator to eat whatever comes along. And it does not care if it eats some poor zebra's baby. That baby could be fresh out of the womb, barely taking its first steps, and if a lion can get to it, that lion's going to eat that zebra. He does not care. So he has no regard for the weak Christian. Doesn't matter if you're weak. He doesn't care. As a matter of fact, he prefers, right? A lion's going to go after whatever's the slowest and the weakest and the one that's separated from the herd. He does not care about us at all. So he's going to go after the weak Christian. He's going to go after the new Christian. He's going to go after the young Christian. He's going to go after the Christian that's been hurting. Again, right? How many times have you ever heard someone who, for example, I hate to say this, but lost a child? All right, and they raise up their faces to God and renounce God. I'll never worship God again. He allowed my child to be killed in an accident or whatever it might be. I lost my baby, and then I'm done with God. I'll never set foot in that church again. What's Satan going to do? Does Satan go, well, hold on, I'm going to give them a chance to get back on their feet. Let them get a little. I can't touch somebody. I can't tempt somebody like that. That would be unthinkable to tempt someone who is hurting the way they're hurting. Is that what Satan does?
He's standing beside him, whispering that.
He's telling them that, yeah, he's the one convincing them to say those very words. And what they've done is they've made him the god of their world at that point. They don't think that. Understand? They're not saying, "Hey, I'm going to leave off of God and I'm going to promote Satan." They're just simply saying, "I don't want anything to do with God anymore." At that point, they have removed God from that pedestal and they have placed Satan firmly and squarely right on top of that pedestal. That's the way. Listen, that old Irish proverb, "There's nothing so queer as folk." We're weird. That's strange what we'll do. And in spite of all evidence to the contrary, it's incredible what we will do in our own minds justifying our decision. Now see, to the world, Job would have been perfectly justified in saying, look, God, if this is what you're going to be, if you're just going to simply give it to me and then turn around and take it away from me again, I could get that from the world. The world would say, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Why wouldn't you do something like that? That's not what he does. That's what we talk about. We talk about his integrity remains intact. He is not capricious, as God is not. He doesn't simply say, "Well, I'm going to turn my back on God as quickly as I turn to Him." He is faithful and he has integrity, much like the God that he serves. Okay. All right. So he says, "Skin to skin, all that a man has, he'll give up for his life. Touch his bone and his flesh, and he will not see." And what does Jehovah say? What does God say? He says, "He's in your hand. He's in your hand, but spare his life." And Satan walked away from there. He said, "You're going to be very careful not to kill Satan or kill Job, because if he kills Job, then God it's going to be bad." All right. So he says, "All right." So he goes, and what does he do? So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord, and he smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. So from the soles of his feet to the top of his head, he had these boils. Now, I've had boils. They are unpleasant, to say the very least. All right. So he took him a shard of pottery to scrape himself with, and he sat among the ashes. And then said, okay, now let's look. This idea of what Job had. There's some people that had been. We got to be very careful that we don't make some modern medical diagnosis of Job based on what we read in Old Testament Scripture. We don't know what he had. It could have been something that was just peculiar to what Satan was able to conjure. But we do know this. There's a couple of things that we find in there. Number one, and we'll read this because we're going to get into this a little bit later. But in chapter 19 and verse 17, it talks about his breath stank. In Job 7 and verse 5, it talked about there were worms in the sores. In Job 30:30, it says that his skin was turning black and it would fall off. And in Job chapter 2 and verse 12, it says that even his own companions did not recognize him. They didn't know who he was when they saw him. So Job, this was not a simple matter of, hey, I've got a lot of sores. It's not chicken pox. This is a disfiguring, loathsome disease. It certainly would have made him, if he were under Mosaic law, would have made him unclean. He would have been unable to go to the temple to worship. Again, talking about dating this, likely it took place even before Mosaic law, but really even then, God had prescribed what was good and what was not good. So it's possible that while he was having these issues, he was not able to worship God in the manner in that he was accustomed to worshiping God. All right? So whatever it was bad. And it was all over him. It wasn't merely concentrated, I had one boil and it was on my back and it hurt. It was one of the most painful things I've ever had. But the rest of me, I looked just fine. There was nothing wrong. I was able to get up and move around and do everything, and finally I had it taken care of, and it was okay. This was from the very top of his head all the way down, and the only thing that would give him a relief was to take a shard of pottery and scrape the skin. I don't know if it was because of an itch or it was to get rid of the dead skin or whatever it was, but this is a man. Now think about where he was. Think about where he was. Let's go conservatively and say a couple of weeks ago, where was he? On top of the world. He had everything. He had his health. He had a large family with 7 sons. He had, I don't know much about Job's wife, but we'll see here in just a couple moments. I don't know if it was the greatest situation, but I think we may be reading too much into that. But he had everything. He was the wealthiest man in the East. He had everything. He had fame. He had honor. He had all of this. Now he's being reduced to a poor wretch living. And if we read if we read into it what I think we should read into it, he no longer even lived in his own home. He's sitting in ashes, miserable, wretched, shunned, because nobody's going to want to be around a man that's got his skin's turned black and he's oozing and he's got horrible breath and there's worms in the sword. Nobody's going to want to be around somebody like that. It's likely he wasn't even living at home anymore. All right, and this is where he is. So what happens? He scrapes himself with the potsherd. He sits in the ashes, and then his wife says to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Are you still clinging to this? Renounce God and die." Now I want you to think about that for just a couple of moments. There's a reason that the devil did not kill Job's wife during that first encounter. It could have been just as easy just to kill her too. Take away everything that he's got. But he realized, even Satan realized, he had a very powerful weapon at his disposal. What does he do? He speaks to Job's wife. Satan whispers in her ear. And what does his wife say to him? Exactly what Satan wanted him to say. Curse God and die. Curse God and die. Just tell him to curse God and die. Curse God and die. Listen, you're miserable. You might as well just die. So what was Satan's heart? Like I said, he picks everything. And he even says to her, "You speak, be quiet. You speak like one of the foolish women speak." And that was really what it was. She gave an ear to Satan, and Satan was going to use her as a tool to get Job to do what he wanted him to do. He didn't care if he did it because of the death of his kids. He didn't care if he did it because of the loss of all of his goods. He didn't care if he did it because he had sores and boils all over his body. He simply wanted Job to do exactly what he wanted him to do. Curse God, renounce God, and die. And then, guess what? Satan's got him. Satan's got another soul to burn in hell with him. That's exactly what he wanted. He used every tool at his disposal. But what does Job do? Does Job give in? Absolutely not. He even speaks. It's interesting how calmly he speaks to his wife, especially with everything that's been going on. But he speaks to her actually fairly calmly that we read here. You're speaking like one of the foolish women. I like, and look what he continues on. He said, "What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil?" So he's saying that God is a fair God. God is a just God. God, as he said before, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. He doesn't presume to know the mind of the God that he serves. He merely acknowledges that God is in control. God knows right from wrong, and God is not going to do evil to him unless there's something to be done. He doesn't understand why, and that's part of most of the book of Job is why. Why am I suffering? He even goes back. He even goes through his mind. What have I done? He recounts everything, and even his friends accuse him of doing wrong. And he goes back. He says, "But I haven't done that." "Yeah, but evil men do this." He said, "Yeah, but I haven't done any of that." And they keep going at him and keep going at him and keep going at him. But he maintains his innocence, number one, and he maintains his integrity towards God. The more I read about this, the more I read the book as I'm studying for the class, the more I wish I'd read more of it earlier on in my life, because it is an absolutely astounding book. You need to read it. If you're just reading it when we're in here, you're not getting everything out of it. You need to read this when you get home. Make your plans to look at what's being said here. Okay?
Did you know that, I read this anyway, that now universities are teaching
Mm-hmm.
lists the book of Job as a must-read
Yep.
for students.
There was one, I'm trying to remember what university it was, but they talk about, there's a philosophy class, and one of the topics is Stoicism. And they said Job is a benchmark in Stoicism. It's maintaining your integrity no matter what. No matter what comes your way, you plow on and you do what you've got to do. And it is certainly that. He is not what you would call a classic Stoic, but you see the elements of Stoicism in Job's narrative. You certainly do. The way he says that there are certain things that you do and certain things that you don't do. And Job says, I'm going to maintain what I'm doing. I know that I'm doing right. I don't understand why this is happening, but I know that I'm doing right before God. And I'm not going to change that because 3 guys come and accuse me of things that I haven't done. And that's a lesson for all of us. Sometimes we got to plant ourselves. And when the world, this is in a movie, when the world's telling you to move, you said sometimes you got to plant yourself like a tree and say, no, you move. We plant ourselves. Let God plant us where we need to be, and we don't move. And if we can do that, we can weather everything in this world, if we maintain our integrity with God, because He's going to plant us, He's going to establish us, and He will not allow us to be moved. He won't allow us to be tempted more than we're able to bear, and then when we're tempted, He'll provide a way of escape. He's going to do everything for us if we just plant ourselves and not move when the world tells us to move. All right? So, look at what he says. He says, shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Exactly what he said earlier, just in a different fashion. He says, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now, that doesn't mean that Job had harsh thoughts towards God and simply didn't voice them. It simply means that he didn't do what Satan wanted him to do, which was renounce God. He did not sin. He did not charge God foolishly, right? He didn't sin with his lips or charge God foolishly, and it acknowledges that again. And we came right to the end of it, and we're going to stop right there because we are at that point. Okay, anybody got anything they want to add? All right, because next week we're going to talk about his mourning, and then his buddies showing up, his 3 friends showing up. These are men who were known for wisdom, but their wisdom was wisdom of the world. They didn't have the wisdom of God, and that was the problem. They were giving him advice, and as far as worldly advice, it may make sense, but not as far as God's concerned. See, they presumed to know the mind of God, and they didn't know the mind of God either. Matter of fact, the closest one to it was Job. Job just didn't understand, and that's a big difference. Sometimes bad things happen to us. We don't understand it, but we know that there's nothing that's going to happen to us that God does not intend for good. He wants it to happen for good. So we're going to talk about that next week. All right? All right. We're going to sing 517 as our song of invitation. If there's anything that we can do for anyone that's here, we can pray for you. We've got a lot of folks on our prayer list. Please keep those folks in your prayers, okay? And those things are working. Man, we've got some folks that have had some bad situations, and they've been taken care of, and I know it's because of the prayers. So we've got some folks to pray for testing. We've got some folks to pray for surgeries. Some folks are in rehab. All of these things going on. Keep praying for these people. But if there's anything we can do for anyone here tonight, while we stand and while we sing.